Hey, everybody, Michael Steele here. Welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. It is always a treat when you're in the house. Guess what? We've got a great conversation coming up with independent political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Reed Galen. Now, before moving to the private sector, Reed served as deputy campaign manager for John McCain's presidential campaign, and he was deputy campaign manager for Arnold Schwarzenegger's successful bid for the governorship, re-election for governor in 2006. Now, my conversation with Reed ran the gamut. We talked a little bit about the housekeeping for Lincoln Project. We talked about a little bit of SCOTUS. Then we also got into why 2022 is going to require a great deal more work, a great deal more time, and a hell of a lot more commitment than 2020. All of that and more coming up next on the Michael Steele Podcast. Always a pleasure to have you back on the podcast, man. I hope you and the family are well. Everybody's surviving, getting ready for summer, right? That's what it's all about.
Trying to. I live here in Utah, Michael, and it's already snowed twice this week. So,
there you go. Well, maybe summer.
It'll get here eventually, and then we'll complain.
Eventually.
Right.
It'll get there eventually. Well, I'm glad you're on, man. So, look, there's so many different ways to begin a conversation after the last couple of weeks that we've had.
Sure.
But I think probably, with guys like you, always like doing sort of the top line view of where you see things. Certainly the work at Lincoln Project is afoot in an incredible way. That's an important piece of the puzzle going into the fall.
Sure.
We've got big primaries coming up, obviously, in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, Georgia. What's your assessment right now of if you're putting a button on the moment, what does that look like for you?
It doesn't matter how many times we say, don't let a lack of imagination be your biggest hurdle, that we cannot expand our imagination fast enough.
Yeah.
Michael, as I spent 5 weeks in Florida in Palm Beach County during the recount in 2000. And I thought that would be the craziest 5 weeks I would ever spend in politics. And every year has been exponentially more insane since then. So, look, I think that, people talk about, in the Ohio Senate primary, for example, they say, 68% of people voted against J.D. Vance, therefore it's not Trump's party. I see it like this. No, it is Trump's party. His endorsement got Vance over the line. It's a binary system, right? It doesn't matter if he could have got, it could have been 42 people in the race. He got 8%. If he got 8% and everybody else got 5%, it doesn't matter.
Right.
He's the standard bearer for the U.S. Senate in Ohio now. But I think that, we'll see. There's Nebraska, as you mentioned, Pennsylvania, where Dr. Oz is, right, where, he got booed when he was out there. We've got, Georgia, Arkansas, right, is coming up where, I would venture to say that the level of craziness that we'll hear out of Sarah Huckabee Sanders after she wins her primary for governor there will be second only to Trump himself and maybe to Carlson, because she knows she's going to win. And then, the topsy-turvy world of, at least my old party, the Republican Party, where, as you mentioned, a place like Georgia, where you could have Brian Kemp looks like he's going to beat David Perdue in a primary for governor there. And you could have Donald Trump say, don't vote for that guy, right? He stole the election from me.
Right.
And what does that do to Herschel Walker, right? Does Herschel Walker ever darken a stage with Brian Kemp? Probably not. If a reporter asked him, are you going to support the Republican ticket? He's going to say, I support Mr. Trump or whatever, right? So it's going to, the news of the Democrats' demise, I think, is too early, given the fact, as you know, that Republicans are perfectly capable of being so insane that even Republican voters, will say, I'm going to stay home this year.
Yeah, so you mentioned Sarah Huckabee. You mentioned a number of the other candidates, particularly those who are running for statewide office, governor, and so forth. Do any of these people know how to govern?
I don't think they care.
Is that a factor anymore? I mean, so it's just a matter of you are the Trumpiest asshole we could find to put up. That makes me feel good knowing that. It doesn't matter that you want to do all these incredibly insane and outrageous things,
right?
To the extent that you talk about them. The only thing that matters is that you are the Trumpiest asshole of the lot. I mean, how does this governing? What is this? What do these states look like 18 months from now?
Well, I mean, first, I think to answer your first question, I think the answer is no, they don't care about governing. But I think that in a state like Georgia, where Brian Kemp is already the governor, I think you're seeing why, the legislative leadership and rank and file legislators are behind him, why the lobbying community, the business community is behind him, because they know, like, look, you may be upset with him as I am about passing the voting rights, the voting restriction laws.
Right.
But at the end of the day, he didn't steal the election for Donald Trump. Brad Raffensperger didn't either. And you can make an argument that the legislature and the business community in that state would rather have him than David Perdue. Right. As far as if they had a Republican choice. But I think about your question in 18 months, I think we're already seeing it in places like, frankly, most of it's the old Confederacy, right? Florida, Mississippi, Texas, where they don't, Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott in particular don't care about governing, and we see that. So, for example, Greg Abbott, held up every truck at the border, because they were looking for, illegal immigrants or whatever.
Right.
Even the state patrol said we didn't find any, but it cost the state like $44 billion.
45 billion. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not governance, right? He just took $450 million out of the state education fund and is applying it to the Texas National Guard to put more National Guardsmen at the border. That's clearly not helping. And the only result you're getting are dead National Guardsmen, either from dying on duty or killing themselves. That's not governance.
Right.
In Florida, the state has, the highest cost of living increase per capita, fastest in the country. He's out fighting, CRT in elementary school textbooks and Disney, the Disney Corporation. That's not governance. It's all performative bullshit, to your point. But then you take, it's not performative. It's performative, but it has a real aspect to it.
Yeah.
Then you take places like Missouri or Oklahoma, where, regardless of where you feel, how you feel about Roe v. Wade, the idea that you're putting in, we're going to get rid of IUDs, we're going to get rid of Plan B, we're now going to set up checkpoints to see whether or not you can leave the state. We're going to, Can
we just pause right there for a moment?
Yeah.
I want that sentence to sink in with people, because in one sense, it doesn't matter whether you are pro-life, pro-choice, anti-Roe, pro-Roe, doesn't matter.
Right.
You have states that are looking at seriously legislatively putting into law the ability to set up checkpoints to keep people from leaving the state.
Right.
To have abortions. Or what does that say about where we are as a country right now? That, are people that desperate for authoritarianism in their lives that they're so hopelessly inept and afraid of what's going on in their lives? They're projecting their problems onto so many other people that they're going to look to these Trumpy assholes out here to save them from what?
Well, so I have this theory, and it's not a very good acronym, but I'm workshopping it with you here. Okay. This is what I really do think that these folks, especially these authoritarian, and they're not even Republicans, Michael.
No, they're not.
You and I were Republicans. I was never a conservative, right?
Right.
As Jeremy Peters in his new book, I think brilliantly says, a lot of these people, they're not Republicans and they're not conservatives. They're anti-liberals. That's what they are.
That's what they are.
And so, I feel like, and you saw this in Minnesota the other day with this guy saying, we don't want any pre-education, right? Kids should be in the home till they're 5 years old. Ask them how many moms that's going to work out for.
Right.
Ask how many working moms that's going to work for.
But it's always the men who are the ones running their mouths. The women are like, could you shut the hell up?
Right. But so this is my working theory. They want you poor. They want your kids stupid. They want your family sick, and they want you angry. Now, they've already got people angry. They've already got people's families sick. And the two left are stupid kids and you being poor. it makes you completely dependent on them, which, as you know, Michael, is
Yeah.
180 degrees away from small government, government out of your bedroom, all the other stuff, right?
That's right. That's
and
right.
so for us, like when we talk about it, it's like you and I are talking about, speaking Latin, right? Like it's not the same language anymore.
Yeah.
It's not the same party anymore. And to your point about whether or not people want this, I think there are, as you know, the Republican primary base they are those anti-liberals, right? And they don't have to make up more than what, 25% of the party.
That's it. Yeah,
right?
Easy.
And then what you have is the rest of the people who like, to hell with it. I don't like any of you, so they don't pay attention.
Right.
And then you have what we see now with I think maybe Democrats are waking up going, oh, they really are going to do this, where like people like you and I have been screaming this from the mountaintop since like we knew what Trump was. Like we knew what he was. From the moment we laid eyes on him, we knew what he was. And everybody's like, oh, well, we're going to beat him in 2016. Okay, it's going to be a walk. It's going to be a cakewalk in 2020. None of this stuff is really going to happen.
Right.
And then, then they compound that by actually not doing anything to counter it, which is why I think you see now that voting rights is still not addressed. They get all spun up about, codifying Roe, in federal legislation. That's not going to happen. They're still arguing with Joe Manchin about Build Back Better, when Joe Manchin, like, how many times can he stick his middle finger in your face and say, I'm not going to do what you want?
That's so true, bro. That is so true. This man is like, okay, there are only two ways to spell no.
Right.
N-O and F-U.
Right. And so, I think that's it, but it's also, I was in California last week speaking to a group, and, Republicans, Republicans are preternaturally, predestined to fight, right? We are not afraid of the fight. We run to the fight. And I said to these folks, almost all Democrats, I said, the way sometimes Democrats fight is if like they were the Ukrainian army and they saw the tanks coming, and they would say, Russian tanks, please let me tell you why you shouldn't come to my country. Let me explain to you why it's not good for you and why this is actually against your interests. Right. As the Russian tanks just kept rolling and rolling. And then they turn around and watch the tanks roll away and go, but wait. Right. You don't understand.
Let me make my point.
Right. As opposed to digging a ditch and saying, like, this is the line I'm going to die on.
Well, and it's the digging the ditch part for me, and I think for a lot of people out there, that is an essential element that's missing from the Democratic strategy, such as it is at this point, which then gets us to the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Lincoln Project did a phenomenal job, not only digging those World War I type trenches, right? Strategically across the battlefield in 2020, but reinforcing those trenches with some pretty damn effective heavy artillery. Right? Yeah. You guys, you wasted no ammo in that regard. So how are you, from the Lincoln Project perch,
right,
setting up this cycle, seeing this cycle? Now that you've got this, as we've just discussed, this sort of broad view of the range of where the battles are,
right,
where the defenses are weak, where the opportunities are strongest. How are you guys looking at going into this cycle?
So let me just say, one thing is, as you look from cycle to cycle, right? There's, as you know, there are a lot of, DC-based groups in both Republican Party and the Democratic Party have this, whether or not it's the campaign committees, the RNC, the DNC, the super PACs, whatever it is. And they fight the same war year in and year out, right? We're gonna choose our target states. We're gonna choose the ones we think we can win. The ones that are gonna lose, goodbye. We're gonna do a whole bunch of polling. Right, we're going to raise a whole bunch of money. We're going to write a whole bunch of crappy ads that we're going to test the hell out of, and then sometime in like the second week of August, we're going to dump all that stuff onto the air, right? And basically hope against hope, right? And they have a budget, like, okay, I need to put 72% on the air. I got to put 20% into digital. I got to do some mail here, and then whatever. That's, I think, the wrong way of looking at it. First and foremost, it does not take into account the fight you're in. Right. Second, to your point about 2020 was the easy fight. We had one very big, bad guy to go after.
Right.
Right. And that was all we did. This is a much different, much more difficult, much more dispersed fight. First of all, there's a whole bunch of these little guys, right? And because of that, you know, the resources necessary to fight them are different, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's just money, right?
Right.
I mean, everybody, as you know, everybody thinks, oh, money in politics equals victory. It doesn't. It buys you options, but it doesn't buy you victory. So let me talk about this. So, you know, as I mentioned, the committees, right? So let's just use, there's a governor's committee, there's a Senate committee, there's a House committee. Doesn't matter the letter behind it. And they are each both worried about and responsible for their particular area of the cycle, right? House races, Senate races, governor's house, governor's mansions. We see it a little bit differently, which is our political team, led by guys named Trygve Olsen and Jeff Timmer, sort of took it a different way. They looked at 350 different races around the country, and they started scoring them on a list of variables that even makes what hair left I have fall out. But the bottom line is they came down to 21 races, not necessarily focused on whether or not it would hold the House or hold the Senate or whatever, but
Right.
whether or not it was important for the future of democracy in America. So, for example, in the state of Arizona, it is important that Carrie Lake, who's running in the Republican primary, not be the next governor, because she is crazy, and she has said, like, I will overturn the election. If I am governor and Donald Trump is running, I will do whatever I want. You know, I take ivermectin for breakfast, and if I'm governor, I'm going to have, you know, the Arizona State Patrol go to Washington D.C. and arrest Anthony Fauci, right?
Right.
Then, you know, there's another Republican, Robson, right, who is more Doug Ducey, right? She's probably more conservative than I like, but is unlikely to steal an election for Donald Trump. But Katie Hobbs is the governor, is probably the likely Democratic gubernatorial candidate, right?
Right.
It's important that she win, I think, because if she wins that race, that also means that Mark Kelly wins by a pretty healthy margin. There's a Democratic Secretary of State there, and the Democrats probably take a couple of House seats in that state. Wisconsin's the same way. If Tony Evers, the incumbent governor, wins there, that means that Ron Johnson probably loses, and that there are a couple of House seats there. Pennsylvania's the same way. Josh Shapiro pulls John Fetterman or somebody across the line, as opposed to Fetterman pulling Shapiro across the line.
Right.
And so what we see is, like, how do we make sure that we're in the places where, you know, the people that need to win in 2022 are winning, but also because, Michael, again, this goes back to our vivid imagination, all those members of legislatures, those secretaries of state, those attorney generals who wouldn't cross the line to steal the election for Trump in 20, I have no confidence they won't do it. I have every belief that they will do it in 24,
Right.
if they had to.
If they had to.
And so that's how we're seeing it a little bit different.
No,
And
and what I love
see,
about,
like,
folks, what I love about what you just heard from Reed is that is basically the strategy I employed in 2010 to win state legislative races, to win congressional seats. You know, Rove and others were saying the best we could do is 39 seat pickup. And I was just saying, okay, no, I think we can do better. No one in the party was focusing on state legislative races, House races, state Senate races. And so it really kind of falls into the narrative in the way you describe it of, in many instances, people kind of look at politics top down. The Senate helps the governor, and the governor helps the state legislature, and the legislature helps the county. A lot of times, from my experience, it's bottom up, because a lot of those folks tend to be a little bit closer to the grassroots, and therefore have the juice to help a governor pull across the line, or help a congressman get elected. When you elect when they're coming out for a state rep or a secretary of state or someone like that can help pull. So it's the point being, it is vitally important to look at the race the way you're looking at it, because the dynamics are very different. It's not one size fits all. And the effect of it in the main can be you win when everyone thinks you won't.
Right.
And you create more surprises in the outcome than you do complying or comporting to the conventional wisdom.
Well, I think that's right. And also, I mean, I've been to Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Texas, Florida, California. I mean, they all have. I'm still getting out to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and a couple other places. But another race that we see is important, Michael. Again, this is for the pro-democracy side, is making sure that Sarah Palin loses in Alaska. Because Sarah Palin, you know, as the guys call her, the mother of MAGA, right?
Yeah.
If she is returned to a position of public trust, right? You know, she's going to look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's going to look at Lauren Boebert. She's going to look at these other people and go, you think you're crazy? Mama's in town, right? Mama's back, right? And like, and so like she is, if we can defeat her, that is a huge, huge thing. And then there's also places like Virginia, right, where there's an Abigail Spanberger who's in a very close district. There's a new, I think either a Norfolk or Newport News seat, right, where you know, it's two military people running. There's a few seats out in California, the Katie Porter seat where she's moved towards the coast, California 27, which is northern LA County, which was very close last time. And you know, as you know, Michael, too, is a lot of these races are going to come down to hundreds or thousands of votes, maybe tens of thousands of votes,
absolutely.
Right? And
absolutely.
So going out and talking to a lot of these activists and a lot of these folks who are, you know, they're I want to say big D democratically aligned, but generally exist outside the democratic superstructure because I don't think they get a lot from it. They're ready. These are very talented people. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for some spark. Right. And that's the other thing, too, is that someone, if it's the president, I hope it is, but someone amongst the Democrats needs to stand up and say, follow me, because that's what a lot of these folks are looking for.
Part of that follow me is how you call it out. And again, this is one of the strengths of what you do individually and what you do as part of Lincoln Project. So I want to pull up for shits and giggles because you were just so expert in this tweet. So there's a candidate, Jim Bognet, who's running. He's a Trump-endorsed American First candidate in Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district.
And just in full disclosure, I go back to 2006 with with Jim, when we worked for Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay,
right?
so this is good.
And then he worked for a guy named David Dewhurst in Texas, who was the lieutenant governor, running against Ted Cruz, right? So Jim has long been an establishment Republican guy.
So he's up here bragging. So he was at the rally the president just did in Pennsylvania, and it was something to behold. Just one little snippet that you tweeted on, and it gets us into a very interesting spot. Let's take a quick listen.
This is God's tears that Joe Biden is in the White House.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, Joe Biden doesn't belong in the White House. He belongs in a nursing home, and Kamala Harris belongs in a nut house.
So he's sitting up there talking about the rain is God's tears that Joe Biden's in the nut house. You tweeted in response, Bogdan for Congress. Remember that podcast we taped in 2015 when you shit all over Trump? Remember calling me in 2016 and begging me to delete it because you wanted a job on Trump's campaign? I do.
Right.
That is what I appreciate about that is not allowing these people to get away with the pretense that, you know, they've been all MAGA all the time.
Right.
No, this is the J.D. Vance thing. You know, you can grovel back and get Trump's blessing.
Sure.
But we gonna make you pay for it in the process. When you get up off your knees, you're gonna have blood. You're gonna have blood on them knees because all the glass and the stones and the obstacles we're gonna put in the way for you. That's what I think when you're looking at a lot of these candidates. I know that's something that worries the hell out of Mitch McConnell, because he sees who these people are. He knows where a lot of them have been. B, it speaks to how inept the Democrats are for calling this stuff out.
Right.
And it goes to the importance of the strategy you're talking about for 22 and beyond, in that you have to look at these races and understand who these people are.
Yeah.
Who are putting their names on the ballot that the party and Trump are getting behind.
Yeah, look, I mean, the guys that are running for, the primary in Pennsylvania is next week as we tape this.
Right.
And the two guys that are running for the Republican nomination for governor in Pennsylvania are out of their minds. I mean, they are so, I mean, they're not Republicans. They're not conservatives. They say all this crazy stuff, and, they want to lock people up and they want to shoot people and all this other stuff. And I just think about, Michael, you think about Bucks County, right? All those collar counties around Philadelphia, who are like that. Those are the normal, quote unquote, normal people, right? Those are the target demos of everybody right now, right? White, educated, upper income, suburban, swing voters, right? They're there's NASCAR dads and there's soccer moms, and now we don't even give them names anymore. It's just white people, right? White people in the suburbs, right? Yeah,
we've been calling that in my household for a long time. So yeah,
but I mean, that's the kind of thing where you look at, you take a place like Philadelphia, right, which is a major metropolitan center. And if it's those guys on the ballot, you could make an argument. We call it the Bannon Line, right? It's 8 to 10% of Republican voters who can't stand the GOP, right? And they're probably going to do one of two things. They'll maybe hold their nose and vote for a Republican or Democrat, or they'll stay home. Like, if we can get that 8 to 10% of, those people in the collar counties of Philadelphia, and we can work with people like Reverend Tyler in Center City, Philly, right, and drive African-American turnout, right? Josh Shapiro wins.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the other thing. This stuff isn't rocket science. You just have to actually put some thought into it and say, how do we put the coalition together? And that's the other part too, is it's going to take a different, broad, deep, diverse coalition of people to make this stuff work. It's not going to be, okay, we've got 45% are going to vote for Republicans, 45% are going to vote for Democrats. They're over here. We've got the 10% left in the middle, and where do we see this? It's going to be this weird mixing and matching of people. And here's the thing too, is that if the Bannon Line voters, as we call them, are the top of the Republican electorate, then you've got that 15 to 20% of like full on MAGA nuts who don't like anybody, right? They don't like anybody. So like, they don't care who's governor, right? They don't care who's senator because they don't like anybody. If Mr. Trump says this, that's good. If Mr. Trump says they're bad, they probably won't show up. And they're far more volatile, right? Because they will just stay home. They are all driven by Tucker Carlson, white nationalism, all the anger and everything else. And so, and that's the other part, is that we see that in a place like Pennsylvania, right, they'll have to double down on that stuff, right, to keep those people fired up. Because the other part too is that if you don't give them that continual dopamine rush, they get bored and they'll move on.
So how that raises a couple of interesting questions, tactically and politically. What does the SCOTUS leak look like in the context of what you just described? In the context of animating, okay, so the libs right now are just, they're like, oh my God, roll, right? And they're just kind of like the kids who are rather spastic with too much candy.
Yeah.
But on the Republican side, you have the leadership saying, row? What row? Row your boat?
Right. Well, and it's all about the leak, right? It's all about process stories, and it's all about protests at somebody's house.
Right. The leak is the most important thing. That's, so how does this impact that base in a way that keeps them engaged? Because here you've gotten it. I mean, the Supreme Court is likely, unless Roberts is able to work a miracle, I suspect the 5 justices that were there for overturn in February are there now largely because of this leak. That was the purpose. Oh, by the way, audience, this did not come from the libs. This came from the conservative side of the aisle, right?
Absolutely.
Because they wanted to hold that 5-seat majority, that 5-vote majority they had, because I think Roberts was effectively moving at least one of them off of that point.
Right. I think you're right. So I think that it is a volatile issue for for both Republicans and Democrats. Let me start with the Republicans. You're right that, it was weird in the span of a week. Mitch McConnell went and all of his leadership went from saying, we don't think this will be an issue in the fall, to McConnell going on in the well of the Senate saying maybe, in 2025, overturning Roe will be the law of the land, which is weird because, again, they're stuck in this place, which is 70%. I think 70% of Americans in a survey out the other day said like they don't support overturning Roe v. Wade.
Right.
They know that they can't win without those white people that we were talking about. And so they're trying to make it about inflation. Now, the truth is, Michael, as you've seen, and we, maybe to all of our utter disdain, that Americans can't concentrate on something for more than like a week. So this is an issue now. Who knows what will be an issue in September? But I think that if Republicans, and this is the other side, the downside for Republicans, like they don't have a plan for anything, right? Like they don't, it's all performative. It's all, going to be Joe Biden's a socialist or Kamala Harris is a socialist, whatever it is, right? They'll come up with it. On the Democratic side, they have an opportunity, but they have to take the opportunity as it presents itself, not as they want it to be, which is, I think that there are people probably like my wife, right, who are, are really upset about it. But, and we saw this happen to Tim Ryan the other day, Republicans are going to plant questions and say, okay, but where are you on third trimester or partial birth abortion?
There you go.
And and then Democrats are going to spin like tops because they're scared to death that whether or not it's Emily's List or Planned Parenthood or NARAL will say, there are no conditions, right? And that's not a popular opinion either, no matter who wants to believe it. So Democrats have to be, they have to be confident. They have to stay out of the trap that Republicans, as you know, are already laying for them, which is they want Tim Ryan or somebody like him to get tangled up, and then they're going to run a horrific commercial of images of a partial birth abortion and say, this is what Tim Ryan stands for.
That's right.
And then Tim Ryan's going to spend the next 5 months saying, I don't support that. I don't support that. Right. And then, as you know, the culture war flywheel starts to
folks,
spin.
if you want an illustration of what Reed is just giving you, I give you the Virginia gubernatorial race and the fateful comment of the Democratic candidate who said that parents had no business basically concerning themselves about their kids' education. And next thing you know, it was CRT for the next 6 weeks of the campaign. And that's exactly the narrative that you're going to be looking at in this situation, but it'll be abortion. So how is Lincoln Project responding to this Roe narrative? Session, or you guys kind of like, okay, let's see where this lands, or just kind of hands off, or what?
No, I think, I think it is, to me, I mean, from my perspective, again, regardless of whether or not you're pro-life or pro-choice, from my perspective, the idea that a conservative justice would say that there's no grounds for this, over 53 years, when the country's only 242 years old. Okay, so what you're saying is it's been around for more than 20% of our existence, but it doesn't have deeply held roots. Right. But to me, that's one too, as someone who does, who was a Republican in part, Michael, because of the belief in individual liberty and that, the government stopped at your door, right? This, I think, opens up, and we're already seeing this in states, as we mentioned earlier, right? First of all, it tears the country down the middle for purely political and ideological purposes, right? And you could say, oh, well, Brown versus Board of Education, but Brown versus Board of Education was for the greater good. Right. That was an equalizing decision. Right. That was not one that said, it wasn't the opposite. Right. It wasn't like, oh, no, it was a Plessy versus Ferguson or whatever, the separate but equal decision. Right. That was the wrong decision. Roger Taney, whichever, Dred Scott, that was the wrong decision. Right. And Alito is outlining a bad decision, a wrong decision for the wrong reasons. But again, for me, my concern is, where do they go next? Right. So it's this in Missouri. Again, it's Plan B, contraception. Greg Abbott said on tape last year that contraception would be the next thing. Right now, it's okay. In Texas, it's going to be okay. Well, if you're undocumented, you can't get a public education. Right. Okay, so we're going to have a bunch of uneducated, undocumented people running around the country. That sounds like a great idea. the loving decision, interracial marriage, right?
Right.
Where does it stop? And that's and Michael, unfortunately, I don't think we're hyperbolic anymore, because I think that these folks, especially in these conservative states with these conservative legislatures, or with these, I'm going to call them radical legislatures and radical governors, will do this stuff to just cater to a very small percentage of the population. The problem is that the population is broad, diverse, has a lot of different opinions. And, you're going to go back on Obergefell. You're going to get rid of gay marriage, right? And which is what Ken Paxton already is teeing up in Texas, to get a suit saying it's not in the Texas Constitution. Other conservative AGs will say the same thing, and it'll be right back to it, right? And so now you're going to have a situation where it's like, you can be gay married in California, but you can't in Utah. Like, how the hell is that going to make sense?
So and again, it goes to the it's a broad point, but it's also very narrow, in that people looking at these storylines emerging, and very much like Trump, Republicans are telling people what we're going to do.
Right.
And the reason they're telling you this, folks, is because they don't think you can stop them.
Right.
Not only do they not think you can stop them, they genuinely believe you don't want to stop them. That you want them to be the avatar of your aggression,
right,
on these subjects. You like the idea of putting a bounty on a woman's womb. Of course, as long as it's not your daughter's womb, right?
Right.
Because
or your wife's. Actually, if it's your wife, maybe.
Or your wife, right. I mean, because then it becomes because that guy out in where was it? Was a candidate who was running, I believe, for a congressional seat, who made the comment on tape on a radio show that, I just told my daughters, if you got raped, just lie back and enjoy it.
And just got crushed. And it was a special election in Michigan. Yeah.
He got in Michigan. He just got crushed in Michigan. But here's the point to people, to idiots like that, is they say that stuff. And of course, my response to him was, okay, so if your daughter's raped by a black guy, will you feel the same way? If he's raped by, if she's raped by a family member, do you feel the same way?
Well, and that's the other part too, is that,
they're not willing to draw those lines because they don't think those scenarios will ever happen. But those are real life instances for other real people out there.
So I think that's your point, though. I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is, it's not that they don't think that it'll happen. It's that it doesn't matter to them, because they will either be in a position of wealth or power or both to be able to, and I'm going to be crass here, take care of the problem. Right. Like, oh, no exception for rape and incest. Okay. So you're going to make a 14-year-old girl who was raped by her uncle carry that baby to term and live with it for the rest of her life. And they're like, it's God's will.
Right.
Okay. Right. And was it God's will when he was God like, yes, you should rape the 14-year-old girl, uncle. Right. Like, and so this is will too? Right. So this is where, they hide behind the Bible. And look, I think
because they discount the one thing, because there's no such thing as God's will. God does what God's going to do. What the will part is what he gave us, free will.
Right.
And I think that they don't want to acknowledge.
Right. And look, I do think that, and this is one thing that we've been talking to our Democratic friends about, is I do think that there are millions of votes in the faith community available to Democrats, but Democrats don't talk to them. And specifically outside of the African-American Latino populations. But I think in the white faith community, right, in the Anglo faith community, Presbyterians, all the vanilla ice cream sort of, Protestantism, I think there's a lot of votes out there. I think there's a lot of votes in the exurbs in the rural areas too, because, these are folks who consider themselves decent, law-abiding, hardworking folks, and they don't like it either. Because this is the other part, and maybe this is too broad and too high a point, is all of this comes down to, if they will do it to that person, to women, to half the country, right?
There you go.
What makes you think they won't do it to you eventually?
I've been saying that over and over again to all these Trump Republicans who come up in my face. I'm like, baby, you're next. You're just too stupid to realize it.
Right. I mean, it's Martin Niemöller. First they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unions. Then they came for me, and no one was left.
No one was left. There was no one there to protect me or help me. And that's where a lot of these folks are going to find themselves. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we want to get a little bit more into some of the campaign strategy that Reed is assessing as we look at the 2022 cycle, the big issues of the day. More with my buddy Reed Galen right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele podcast. We are having our conversation with my man, Reed Galen. Reed, on the last point that we were talking about before we went to break on how this landscape is shaping up, and certainly how Roe could be a factor in it. And of course, there are other big issues that the Supreme Court are going to be tackling when they come down with their rulings on June 30th. Affirmative action comes to mind. That'll be a whole another tripwire. Despite all of that, there's a great piece by Harry Enton in CNN.com where he talks about the GOP still favored. By and large, the American people are like, yeah, we're going to give, despite the overturn of Roe, despite all these other things, we're going to give the power back to Republicans, the party that advocated for, as we're learning more and more from the January 6th Commission and the tapes and other things that are coming out, the coordinated effort around the insurrection. And yet the American people seem to be okay with that. They're saying, you know what? Inflation's too high and I'm paying too much money for gas. So I'm going to give it back to the insurrectionists because they will make it better.
So, I think that one is that the Dems, I guess the January 6th committee now is going to finally have hearings in June.
Right.
If it were me, I would have started them on January 6th. Right. And just run them every night, until election day.
Yeah.
And just because this is, Michael, this is not a great secret. Like the difference between how we operate politically, and tactically in a race and how our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle, we want the bad guys to react.
That's
right.
It.
We want them to turn toward us. We want them on the defensive because Republicans, as you know, don't like being on defense.
That's right.
Because if your whole campaign, if your whole essence of being is predicated on lies, then you have to come up with more and more crazy lies to cover up the stuff you just lied about.
Yep.
Right. And that's where the Dems don't understand is like, if you had been doing this for months, right, they all would have been on defense, right? They all would have been trying. And this is the other part. They are what we call an authoritarian movement. The only thing we know about them, Michael, is that they all hate each other more than they hate you and me or they hate Democrats.
That's
right. It's the only thing we know.
That's right.
And so, you have to put them in a place where they're on defense. I think the other part too is that we still have a lot of folks who, they're the lotus eaters, right? They want to go to sleep because they're so sick of everybody. They're sick of the noise. They're sick of the chaos. They're sick of COVID, right? They're sick of inflation. They're just mad. And I think, unfortunately, as you know, when that snowball starts to roll, the party in power gets punished, whether or not, and too many people in this country still go into a voting booth and they see candidate A with a D behind their name, candidate B with an R behind their name, and they think, okay, well, I'm 52 years old. Republicans have always been for this. Democrats have always been for that. And, I'm on the natural, I'm going to vote for the Republican. And so I think that's also, low information generally, not enough media coverage of,
Right.
Look, there's 435 congressional races. There's, 2,000, 5,000 legislative races. I don't know how many total. It's going to be probably 10,000 individual races in 2022.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to catch up. So I think that the antipathy towards everybody, the apathy towards everything, I think makes it difficult for Democrats. But again, don't underestimate the insanity like you saw in 2010 or McConnell saw in 2010 with a bad crop of candidates. I mean, his conference, like McCarthy's in the House, is going to be more Trumpy, not less, regardless of whether or not he's minority leader or majority leader.
And I think that's actually an excellent point, because I believe there is still this mindset that somehow the Senate will be above it all. And that's not what I'm picking up from the candidates that are potentially coming to the Senate next January. And it'll be interesting McConnell gets everybody to sort of line up behind him. He doesn't have a Marjorie Taylor Greene to deal with. He doesn't have a Matt Gaetz to deal with, or even a Jim Jordan to deal with. You know, he gets his team to stand behind him, and they're good little doobies, and they salute and nod approvingly. That's not necessarily going to be the case with a lot of these Trump Senate candidates who wind up in sitting in that caucus, who, you know, for better or worse, probably good the filibuster is not being removed, because taking away the filibuster will certainly make the Senate more like the House, and give those guys a great deal more power. But the reality of it is that dynamic changes immensely for McConnell in 22, because in 24, the Senate landscape is almost 10 times worse for Democrats. Meaning Republicans stand to get a pretty damn near close to 60 seats just by looking at the map today.
So think about this. Think about the target Senate races off the top of my head. Let's say and this will go through. Some of these aren't going to happen for a few months. If Blake Masters wins in Arizona, that's a Trump Peter Thiel guy. Ron Johnson wins in Wisconsin, not a McConnell guy. J.D. Vance wins in Ohio. Dr. Oz wins in Pennsylvania. Herschel wins in Georgia, right? Like, now he's down 5. He's down 5 members, and those 5 members are, you know, they go with Cruz and that's right. What's his name? Hawley and Cotton.
That's right.
Right. And then, you know, and so he's like, okay, well, I guess I've held on to Susan
and then he
Collins.
retires, and we're left holding the shit.
Right. Well, of course, he doesn't have anything else in his life. This is all he has. So, I mean, it's not like Mitch McConnell goes back to Kentucky and gets out on his pony in the afternoon, right? Like,
this is true. He's no John Boehner, that's for sure.
No,
Boehner.
He's not that interesting. The truth is, McConnell's not that interesting. He's really pretty boring, right? Like, he cares about power and money.
Occupy his time with, and that's mowing the lawn, smoking the cigarettes, and doing cannabis.
Right. And like, McConnell doesn't do any of that stuff. If he weren't in office, what would he do? Right? He going to be a lobbyist? No.
So you guys at Lincoln Project on just looking at this narrative, and what's going to potentially animate and keep the voters engaged in this cycle. Put out a new ad. I guess it was it came out on the 6th of May, going after billionaires, which was an interesting approach. Let's take a quick listen to some of that.
This election is a simple choice. Last time Republicans were in power, they helped billionaires pay less taxes than you. This time, it's even worse. The Republican plan will raise taxes on over half the country. Democrats have a different plan. Raise taxes on billionaires so you pay less taxes. A simple choice. Republicans, you'll pay more in taxes. Democrats, billionaires pay more.
So what is that? What does that say for you right now? Where do you go with that narrative?
So it's a great question. Like, here, first and foremost, like, we're not a policy organization, right? We're a political organization, and so we say, what is it that we need to win an election, right? Rick Scott, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, put out this 11-point plan for America, which I'm sure you can imagine, Michael, being in the conference room where some nerd from the Heritage Foundation was pitching him on this.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but in the undercurrent of the, you know, everyone skin in the game, everyone pays their fair share, is those people aren't paying their taxes. Right. Those people aren't. The problem is that they're not very good at it. They're not very good at what they did. So, you know, he goes on Fox News with John Roberts, right? Fox News is a home game for these assholes, pardon my French.
Right.
And John Roberts goes, so you're going to raise taxes on half the country and get rid of Social Security and Medicare? And he's like, those are Democratic talking points. And John Roberts like, it's in the plan. It's right here in the plan.
It's in the plan.
Right. And we made an ad like that, and we're like, hey, DCCC, run this. Hey, DSCC, run this ad 8 gajillion times. Because here's the thing, whether you want to believe it or not, economic populism is a motivating factor.
It is.
And if you are a Republican voter and you're being told that a a guy like Rick Scott, an out of touch Washington career politician billionaire, right, who already ripped off Medicare, right, to the tune of billions and got away with it, now wants to take more of your money, right? What is he going to do with it? What's he going to do with that money, right? He's going to be fine, right? But he wants more of your money. And if we know anything, it's like low-income Americans, just like high-income Americans, don't want to pay more taxes, right? And then there's the Medicare and Social Security piece, which isn't in that spot, but we'll come back to, which is he said he wants to sunset every law that the government's ever passed every 5 years, right? Okay. All right. Well, I don't know how many that is, but it's a lot. Right. So,
Yeah,
you know,
and who's going to sit through that session?
right.
Not
And so
Rick
it's
Scott.
like, and here's where, as you know, and the Obama campaign was very effective against Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan in 2012, pushing the old lady off the cliff in her wheelchair, which is, you know, George W. Bush wanted to privatize Social Security, got, you know, nobody was willing to go near that, right? Then, you know, Ryan was always talking about some sort of Ayn Randian craziness with entitlements. And the truth is that we haven't thought about the third rail of American politics in a long time, but it's still the third damn rail,
Still
right?
is, yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's like, who says, you know, keep your government hands off my Medicare, right?
Right.
Like they don't really think about it as government funded healthcare, but that's what it is. And if you tell a bunch of seniors, these assholes are so crazy, they're going to tax your Social Security check, then they're going to take it away, and they're going to take away your free health care. Like, that's bad policy.
Yeah.
And it's bad politics. And so, you like, would a bunch of former Republicans otherwise go, you know, take from the billionaires? I don't know. But the other part, too, is that, you know, and again, I'm not much of an economic populist, but I'm getting there.
Right.
Is like the guys, the Elons of the world and the Bezoses of the world, like their wealth is so spectacularly, they have so much more wealth compared to everybody else, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so what do? They make noise about going to space and buying Twitter, right? And it just shows that like there is an oligarchy that, if it's not already in place, will be soon.
Oh, it will be soon. There's no
that Americans do know they don't like. And if that's a motivating factor to tie those guys to Republicans, it's fine with me.
Yeah, no, that I absolutely agree with your point there, because we just don't see it necessarily for what it is, but it is there and emerging. These folks are so damn rich, they don't know what else to do with their money. So yeah, space exploration, which I've always been concerned about. Look, I'm the guy who sits there and looks at the, you know, those science and sci-fi movies from the 80s and 90s and go, yeah, corporate America taking over space was a bad idea in the 80s. It's still a bad idea in the 2020s.
Well, and just think about it. I mean, you know, in 100 years ago, in the previous Gilded Age, what did, you know, Mellon do? What did Carnegie do? Right? What did these guys do? They built palaces to the public.
That's it.
Right?
Libraries,
they built museums, libraries, colleges, right? All of that. These guys build temples to themselves.
Oh,
right?
Damn.
They think
So
about
true.
like, you know, like, I mean, let's be clear, Michael, every one of these assholes, and, you know, my apologies for calling them assholes, has already figured out like where they've got Walt Disney's frozen head, and like they want their heads in the same place so that they can come back, right? Like they all believe they're immortal, right? They don't believe they're going to die. And eventually they're all going to end up like Howard Hughes in the top of a Vegas hotel room with their nails and their toenail clippings in a jar next to them.
Right.
Like that's how they're going to end up, because just they are, to your point, they are the rulers of their own universe. And just like people like that, they can't imagine that anything bad would ever happen to them. While, you know, 320 million other Americans, you know, are trying to figure out why their rent just went up $1,000 a month.
Amen. So before I let you get out of here, you are one of the architects for sure for Lincoln Project, and in doing that work, what have you learned from it? What has it taught you about advertising and getting a message across to people? It is something that is innate to you because it's what your daddy did as the spokesman for Vice President. God, just blanked on the vice president.
Quayle.
Quail, thank you. And so what have you learned about the craft itself?
Sure.
And the audience that you're crafting the messages for?
A couple things. One is that we have never polled or focus grouped anything. We have never focus grouped an ad ever.
Wow.
We never tested an ad. When we do things, we do them based on what we believe will generate an emotional reaction, either in a voter or when it came to Donald Trump, typically anger, right?
Yes.
And so, stripping away all of that, I remember in 2020 there was an ad, I don't know who did it, for the Maine Senate race, right? And it was like 54 seconds, 6 policy points jammed into that 54 seconds, and then a 6-second disclaimer at the end. Like you could spend $3 million on it. Like, is it going to cut through? No, because everybody's seen those ads. Why in 1964 LBJ ran an ad called Daisy. They ran it one time, which is a young lady, a little girl picking the flowers off picking the petals off a flower. She's counting to 10 while there's a deep voice man counting, behind 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then a mushroom cloud, right? And they ran it one time. Why? Because Barry Goldwater was considered to be a nut. Right. And LBJ's campaign was saying, if you elect Barry Goldwater, that's what you're going to get. And it scared the hell out of the country. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do is sometimes you have to take the gloves off. Oftentimes you have to take the gloves off and say, this is what you're really facing. I mean, just in as an example, last summer, we got a call from an education organization saying, how do we deal with critical race theory? Well, you should say when they say that, they're saying the N word. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, why not? That's what they're doing. Right. And they're like, but like our consultants say we shouldn't do that. I'm like, fine. Like, we're just telling you what we would do. And we did that in the Virginia governor's race.
Right.
Because, right, it's the same as welfare queens or, whatever it is, right? It's coded language to scare white people in the suburbs. That's what critical race theory is. And you have to call it out for what it is. People are like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm like,
want to do that.
All right. Like, this is fine. But
my lawyer said, then what the hell are you calling me for? Talk to your lawyers about doing your ad.
Right. And so I think that's part of the craft. I think the other part too is we are lucky in that, we have one mission, which is to defend American democracy.
Right.
And the only client we have is from our perspective is the country, right? We don't have a president. We don't have a party. We are able, so it gives us an enormous amount of creative freedom to do these things. And the last piece I'll say is because the people that I get to work with every day have been doing this for so long at such a high level that we don't have a lot of the like ego and jealousy of a big campaign, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has ideas. Sometimes your idea wins the day and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you go, all right, I'll come up with something else.
Right.
Nobody's like, I can't believe they didn't make my ad today, because like Michael, I think since we've started, I think we've made 400 ads in 2 years. Right. So like you're just come up with another idea. Your spot's going to get made eventually.
Right.
We used to say that how do your ads get made? Well, we have a meeting every morning and whoever has the worst idea, their ad gets made. Right. There was only half a joke, but that's still how it works.
But let me tell you how well, to the point that you just made. I know when you guys worked with me on my ad in the 2020 cycle, still one of the best, next to my puppy ad, that ad was absolutely amazing, and I still get people responding to it. And I had absolutely no idea when we arrived in Baltimore. I had literally gotten the script such as it was, which was just a few words, sort of. Yet your ability to create the moment and to pull the magic out of that moment and put it on the screen is the essence of the Morning in America ad.
Right.
It is that thing that grabs your attention. And I to tell you, I hear to this day, not blowing smoke here, people know of my association with you guys, and they come up and they want to talk about Lincoln Project. And they are literally saying to me, I hope they are going to do again what they did in 20.
I know. It's a tough act to follow.
Right, exactly. To save us from ourselves in many respects. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of burden. You guys had your hiccups the past year. You navigated through those things. And I brag about this. I said throughout all of that, a significant number of Americans stuck with Lincoln Project because they believe ultimately in what this work is about. And you guys have done a great job with that.
No, look, I mean, we are blessed to get to do what we do, as you are, right? To get up every morning and know why you do something, and to feel in your core it's the right thing to do. For all of us, it would have been so easy and probably pretty lucrative, Michael, to say, this is where the party's gone. Right. Just join the hive, right? It'll be fine, right? And too many of our friends and colleagues have
done that. Yeah.
Look, I got two of my best friends I don't talk to anymore, right? I haven't spoken to them in years.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever will again.
Right.
But like at the end of the day, you had to make a choice. We made a choice. We've never looked back. Through all of the highest of the highs and lowest of the lows, if somebody said, would you, if you had to do it over again, would you do it again? I'm like, a million times. There'd never be a choice, right? And look, if you had told us that we were going to write an op-ed, put it in the New York Times, and a movement was going to show up, like none of us would have believed you.
Right.
But that's the other part too, is because, if the other day, I'll close with this. The other day in one of our group chats, somebody said, they called us a Republican PAC. I mean, are we okay with that? And we're like, who cares? And then somebody goes, yeah, but they called us progressives the other day. I'm like, great.
Right.
Okay. Great. Right.
It works.
It works.
It works.
Right? Be who you are, and people will figure,
right.
But I think that's the thing, is that folks are looking for something, that is simple to understand and makes them feel good about what they're doing every day, right? Look, just like it gives me purpose every day, I hope it gives other folks purpose too, because like we're on the side of the angels here.
Amen.
Right. And I promise I'll shut up after this.
No.
About 3 weeks ago, I was pretty down in the dumps. I don't know which thing it was, right? It was one of the crazy things. And I was talking to a woman who runs one of our partner organizations. And I'm like, I just don't know. Like this might all go down. And she goes, it doesn't matter. She goes, it's the fight. You fight every day. And when you're on your deathbed, you say, did I do everything I could?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, you're okay.
Go in peace.
Go in peace.
The answer is no. You need to stick around and finish the job.
Right.
So get your ass out of that bed and go to work. Reed Galen, one of the best. He's a buddy. I've known Reed and certainly the Reed family, the Galen family, for a long time. It's always a pleasure, man, when you drop by for a conversation. Really, really appreciate it, man. Really do.
Thanks, Michael.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that does it for this time together. I always enjoy it when we get to spend that little bit of time. If you want to follow a little bit more, don't hesitate to check out the good work over at the Lincoln Project on Twitter and Facebook, and certainly follow Reed on Twitter at Reed Galen, and do the download thing. I love it when you do that. You can find me on Spreaker app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts on. And certainly we always have a good time when we're together. Be safe, be well, take care. Until next time.